Let's bring in Republican strategist Malik Abdul and Democratic strategist Kurt Bardella. Good morning, gentlemen. It's nice to see you.
Good morning, Hannah.
So it is the first Saturday. The race has narrowed to Trump and Biden. The three of us have been talking about this for months. They'll both be in Georgia today. Malik, what does that tell you that both of them are holding dueling campaigns?
They understand the importance of Georgia. And I think it's a little different thing that we're kind of looking at nowadays, because Georgia is not the Georgia that it was in 2020. There was no COVID, but also, if you keep in mind, there was no anticipation of Stacey Abrams running for governor after just losing to Brian Kemp, but there was also no Raphael Warnock. So there was a lot of down ballot things happening in Georgia that won't be happening this time around. But I know that both of them know that this is a battleground state. But as you said, Donald Trump has been actually consistently leading in Georgia, but it's an important state.
Yeah, just looking at these poll numbers, I mean, this is slim. So, Kurt, we know Georgia was critical to Democrats winning in 2020. What does Biden have to do again for a win, especially considering what Malik said, that things are a lot different than they were 4 years ago?
Yeah, some things are very different, but again, some things are still the same. It's still Biden, it's still Trump. And what we have seen between then and now is Democrats continue to win, actually, in Georgia. When you look at the special election that led to Raphael Warnock being elected to the Senate, giving Democrats that very slim majority in the Senate, holding on to Georgia, getting him reelected in the last midterm election. So there's a record of success there. And I think what that comes down to is keeping that coalition that they've had intact and able to show up to vote, turning out the vote, making sure that the coalition of African Americans, particularly in Georgia, is essential to Biden winning. I think having the first female black vice president in history on your ticket can help do that, can help inspire that turnout. Keeping younger voters engaged is going to be crucial. And especially in Georgia, let me tell you, the AAPI vote is very crucial. It is one of the real reasons why Democrats have been winning there. It constitutes one of the largest demographics in the Georgia vote for the Democratic Party. And so they need to keep engaging with that community as well.
And Malik, this is a state, of course, that Trump was talking about when he made that infamous call. Remember, I just need 11,780 votes. What does Trump need to do to continue the momentum we saw during the primary?
Trump needs to just continue to, I even argue that he needs to actually keep looking forward. If Donald Trump goes into Georgia and makes 2020 his Georgia campaign, he is going to lose. If the people around Donald Trump make 2020 the 2024 campaign, he is going to lose. Donald Trump has to be focused. Donald Trump has to be less offensive. Donald Trump has to do a number of things. And I've said many times, this is Donald Trump's election to actually lose. The only person that can lose this for him is himself. So he has a lot of things to do on the personality side to actually get people to support him. Policy, I think he's fine. Personality is Donald Trump's problem.
Yeah, I think a lot of voters share that sentiment. Kurt, we're waiting, the three of us are waiting to hear whether Fani Willis, of course, that's a prosecutor in the Trump election interference case, will be removed from that case. How is that playing out in the state of Georgia? Malik, I'll send that to you.
Well, it's a problem. Them getting kicked off the case, obviously, it won't impact the actual case against Donald Trump. That will move forward. The only thing that it does, it actually pushes the timeline back. I think that Fani Willis may now have a competitor in this race. She'll probably win again, but it just kind of sullies her real career, because this is the biggest case of not just hers, of any prosecutor's entire career, and I think that she just fumbled it in this case.
And Kurt, with all those pending court cases our former president is facing, is there a way Biden should be positioning himself better, at least when it comes to the polls?
Yeah, I mean, I think part of that argument that he's going to have to make, and that contrast with Donald Trump, is, do you want the guy who's in court every day fending off 91 indictments? Do you want to return to that chaos? Or do you want continuity? Do you want responsibility? Do you want competence? If this election comes down to competency over chaos, which in a lot of ways that really was the 2020 message in the backdrop of COVID, I think that's an argument Joe Biden knows he can win because he's already won it. I just want to point out that a minute ago, Malik was spot on when he said the one thing that could stop Donald Trump from winning is Donald Trump, his personality. I'm going to point out, this is a guy who's almost 80. He's not changing his personality. Trump is going to be Trump. I think that's the one thing that we know about Donald Trump. He is consistently himself. So everyone who always says, well, if he could just stay on message, if he could just tone it down, if he could just stop being offensive. In other words, if he could just be a completely different human being, he could win this thing in a landslide.
Yeah, here his campaign routinely tells him to stay on prompter, which he, as we know, doesn't a lot of the time. Malik, Trump took the suburbs in 2020. You think he still has the competitive edge in those areas?
It depends on what Kurt just said. It depends on Donald Trump. He can actually appeal to suburban voters. We've seen him do this before. So it's not like he cannot do it, whether or not Donald Trump will stay on teleprompter enough and get out of calling people like Nikki Haley bird brains, the things that turn not just suburban women voters off, but just turn voters off altogether. If Donald Trump can stop doing those things, and we've seen that he can stay on message when he wants to. He needs to want to. That's the problem with Donald Trump.
And Kurt, we know our president's been very busy. He was on the campaign trail in Pennsylvania yesterday. He's in Georgia today. What's his strategy to win?
I think it's to show that he is up for the job. I think the biggest barrier that President Biden has faced to this point is whether or not the American people believe that someone of his age can still do the job. I think he showed with the State of the Union address that he's certainly capable of it. The narrative going into it was, will he even make it through a State of the Union speech? Will he screw up? Will he have gaps? Afterwards, Republicans were saying, well, he was too forceful. He was too energetic. He was too loud. So as long as he can maintain that type of visibility, that type of, I think, observation, he's going to be fine. I don't think that anyone, including Donald Trump, has ever lost an election for being too vigorous. So if that's a narrative surrounding Joe Biden, that's a default win for him. And again, just back to my buddy Malik here. Listen, Donald Trump is not going to stay on message. That's not a prediction. That's a spoiler.
Kurt and Malik, don't go too far, guys. We will continue this conversation. Thank you so much.